Welcome back everyone, it's Eric from Rare Candy here. Today we are back with yet again another Cosmic Eclipse deck profile. This time we are going to be taking a look at the new Volcarona GX. I know a lot of the attention is typically given towards a lot of these tag team Pokemon that we've been getting in recent sets, but Cosmic Eclipse actually does have a decent amount of still solid normal GX Pokemon, including Volcarona, which I definitely wanted to experiment with here on the channel a bit. So this is the same list that was featured in our recent testing rounds video as well. So if you guys do want to see how this deck looks in action, I will be sure to have a link down below in the description for you to check that out as well. And also too, something to keep in mind if you are maybe unfamiliar with those testing rounds videos we do, they usually feature our early, sometimes more unrefined list that we used to start testing with. So that means there might be a few things in here we can potentially tweak or improve upon. Just something to keep in mind as we do go through this deck profile. But anyways, let's get into it and see how this deck is going to look. Up first, we have 4 copies of Larvesta. Pretty self-explanatory. We need some Larvestas to be able to evolve into Volcarona GX. Nothing too special about this one. The attacks are pretty mediocre. But going on to Volcarona GX, the star of the show here, we have 4 copies of this guy. So it's the Stage 1 Pokemon GX, 210 HP. Has a couple of interesting things going on for it. The first of which is the ability, which is, I think, the main reason people are discussing this card. But it allows you to discard a fire energy from your hand and then do 2 damage counters to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So kind of like the old Decidueye GX, but on a Stage 1. And the trade-off is, of course, you do have to discard energy, but Fire has so much support right now that the energy discard really isn't even, I think, a very big deal with a card like this. So that's the main attribute that we really like about this Volcarona. It's just going to fix our math, maybe even help us pick off some low HP basics in the game, maybe like some Inkays or Jirachis, things like that. But its main attack here for 2 fire and a colorless is 160, and you return 2 fire energies from your hand. So 160 is a decent little 2-shotting number. It knocks out the Denes, so we can even pick off the Denes in the late game with like great catches in a turn, which I think is really important as well. So that's kind of like the main core of the deck, but we do have some other Pokemon in here. We have 2 copies of the Dedenne GX for, of course, that Dedechange ability there, just to dump our hand and draw 6. Like I said, we don't really have too much strong draw power in the form of our supporters, so we need other non-supporter based forms of draw power in this deck. And of course, Dedenne is going to be one way we can achieve that. Up next, we have 1 copy of Ditto Prism Star. So this will, of course, allow us the flexibility of evolving into either of our different attackers. We have 1 copy of the Reset Hull Marshadow. So one thing that is a pain about this deck is that it gets wrecked by decks that play Power Plant. And especially decks that play Power Plant and Reset Stamp in particular. So Marshadow is a fairly searchable way we can bounce power plants out of play to allow us to use our abilities, and also to, if we are worried about like a plant stamp in the late game, we can just keep Marshadow on our bench for whenever that play might occur. Then after they stamp us, we can remove the power plant and then refill our hand with Silvally GX. That's kind of like one of the big plays that Marshadow really enables. So it's kind of just like another way to counter stadiums, and we can search it out with Pokemon Communication, whereas we can't with our normal stadiums. And then from there, we have 1 copy of Mew, of course, for that bench barrier ability, just to stop some attacks like Tag Bolt GX or even the new Crossbreak GX on Reshiram and Zekrom. So pretty self-explanatory there. So that is going to be our entire Pokemon line, guys. Going on to our trainer cards, we have 4 copies of Welder up first, as you would probably imagine. So, of course, one of the best cards we have right now in the current format. Attach 2 fire from hand to one of your Pokemon, draw 3 cards. So this, of course, will allow us to power both of our attackers, and also has synergy with Volcarona, because whenever we return those energies to our hand, especially if our Volcarona we're attacking with gets knocked out, we can just slap those energies back down on a fresh attacker, which is pretty cool. Then up from there, we have 4 copies of Red and Blue, a new tag team supporter that we are getting out of the new Cosmic Eclipse set. So you get to search your deck for Pokemon GX that evolves from one of your Pokemon and evolve into it, much like Evo Soda that we've had in the past. You can't do this on the first turn that Pokemon was put into play, though, which is a bit of a bummer. So Red and Blue, the first effect is decent, not too groundbreaking, but the secondary effect is really where the card becomes much more impressive. Whenever you play it, you can also discard 2 cards from your hand and then get 2 basic energies from deck and attach them to that Pokemon that you evolved into. So of course we can essentially power up either our attackers in one go with either Welder or Red and Blue. And of course, like I said, since we play the Silvally GX, we can get Silvally out with Red and Blue dump a couple of cards, play our hand size down a little bit low, then refill it with the Sylvalia GX's disc reload ability. So these are going to be the only supporters we are playing in the entire deck. It's really, I think, all you need most of the time. So going on to the rest of the deck, we have one copy of not Giant Hearts, but Heat Factory, one of the two very good Fire Stadiums that we have in the current format. So this is going to be another way we can draw through our deck without the need for normal supporter cards. So we get to discard a Fire Energy from hand, draw 3 cards. Pretty self-explanatory. Then up from there, we have 2 copies of Giant Hearth, the other super busted Fire Stadium that we have right now. So, of course, we can discard a card from our hand, search your deck for 2 Fire Energies. We can, of course, attach those with Welder. We can use Volcarona's ability to discard them, to do damage. Just pretty much a staple in any Fire deck that's running around right now. Next up from there, we have 4 copies of Pokemon Communication, probably the best generic form of search we have in the current format. So, of course, we can search out anything. We put a Pokemon from our hand back into our deck, get a different Pokemon. So this not only lets us search for anything in the deck, but also will allow us to put Pokemon, specifically evolutions, back into the deck to draw with red and blue. Just because red and blue, you have to get the Pokemon out of deck, not hand. Up from there, we have a pretty interesting inclusion in the list. That's going to be 3 copies of Pokénav. So this was originally 3 copies of Cherish Ball, which seems like it makes sense. But I think the big issue this deck has in a format like we're in is that we don't have Nest Ball. Pokemon Fan Club is kind of mediocre. The new Oaks supporter card doesn't really work well since Ditto and Type Null are on the same typing. Elm's Lecture is also very weak since all of our Pokemon, or all of our main Pokemon, have over 60 HP. So this is kind of like a pseudo Nest Ball replacement for the moment, just because I would rather play something like that than some of these other forms of searching options that we have. So Pokénav, you get to look at the top 3 cards of your deck. You pick a Pokemon or basic energy card. I'm sorry, not basic, but any energy card you find there, put it into your hand. Then you put the other 2 cards back in any order. So like I said, I'm really just prioritizing getting our basics out as opposed to something like Cherish Ball. Cherish Ball is great in the mid to late game once we've already established all of our basics, but that's the big challenge I've really run into this deck. You really want a full bench at all times, and getting down these basics is going to be really important. So I actually do think there is a world where you play Fan Club over this. I only had enough space for 3 spots, and I didn't want to play Fan Club if I was only going to play 3. I want to play 4 or none, essentially. So if you do have room for a 4th Pokénav, you can experiment with Fan Club as well. I do think that is valid. Pokénav is kind of good, not only in the early game, but it's also good in the late game too. Whereas Cherish Ball is only good in the late game, Fan Club is usually mostly good in the early game. So Pokénav kind of splits the difference between both of those options, and hopefully will allow us to get our basics in play a little bit quicker. So up next from there, we have 3 copies of Fire Crystal, another staple in most of the different Fire decks running around right now. You get 3 Fire Energies from your discard back into your hand. So, of course, we can get back those energies we're discarding with Volcaronas to keep doing damage, to use Welder, whatever we might want to do. Next up from there, we have 3 copies of Island Challenge Amulet. This is a card I've kind of been experimenting around with all of my Sylvalia GX decks in particular. So both of our attackers here, they're okay. They're going to be two-shotting a lot of things in the format, and we're really not taking big one-hit knockouts. And to, I guess, make the prize trade skew a little bit in our favor, I've been trying Island Challenge Amulet out, like I said, in all of my Sylvalia-based decks, just because it turns your deck into a bunch of one-prizers that have very good abilities, essentially. But Island Challenge Amulet, it will reduce your HP by 100 when it's attached to a GX, but then that card also gives up 1 fewer prize card. So this is a pretty powerful effect, and another reason I am currently playing this is because I was thinking, well, if we're giving up 2 prizes at a time, that doesn't give us that many turns to actually spread with Volcarona. So Island Challenge Amulet will kind of extend the life of the game a little bit a lot of times to allow you more turns to actually get damage into play with Volcarona. That being said, this is definitely on my list of cards that I am contemplating cutting. There are a few cards I do want to include in this list, more so just like thickening up counts of existing cards, which I'll kind of talk about shortly as well too. But like I said, this is definitely something I've been experimenting around with all of my Sylvalia-based decks. Feel free to try it out, guys, but this is a card that I do think is somewhat cuttable as well. Next up from there, we have 2 copies of Great Catcher. So Great Catcher allows us to discard 2 cards from our hand, and then we switch our opponent's active with one of their benched Pokemon GX or EX. So very good at picking off those Dedennes in the late game, or, you know, we're a 2-hit KO oriented deck with both Silvally and Volcarona. So a lot of times we are going to swing on our opponent, and then they are going to retreat, and then that Pokemon's going to be out of harm's way, and we do need a way to pick those Pokemon off, especially if our spreading doesn't stack up quick enough to pick them off in time. So Great Catcher, I think a staple that's going to be in most decks going forward after Cosmic Eclipse. Next up from there, we have 1 copy of Pal Pad, so we get to put 2 supporters from our discard back into our deck. So this is pretty important for a number of reasons. Our Silvally GXs do require us to play a supporter from hand on the turn we attack with it if we want that 70 damage buff, which of course we do. And also too, with Volcarona GX, putting energy back into our hand when we attack with it, it's going to require us to play Welder probably more times in a game than some decks would, just because every time you attack you have to Welder the energy back down. So Pal Pad, I think, just has natural synergy in a deck like this. And then from there, we have 1 copy of Reset Stamp to round out our trainer cards. Of course, to shuffle our opponent's hand back into their deck and make them draw equal to the amount of prize cards they have remaining. Very good in the late game. Pretty much a staple that's been in the format for a little while now, ever since Unified Minds. So that's going to be it for the trainer cards, guys. Going on to our energy, we have 3, 6, 9, 12 copies of Fire Energy in total in this deck to round out the list. Now, however, I will say this is actually something I would not mind increasing the counts of, or maybe even a Fire Crystal. So right now, I think going forward, one of the next batch of changes I want to experiment with is maybe cutting the challenge amulets altogether and playing maybe 2 more Fire Energy or like a Fire Crystal. Also maybe thickening up the Pokénab count and or trying out Fan Club in place of it if Pokénab doesn't continue to prove to be that good. But like I said, I just kind of want to thicken up existing counts of some of the cards that are going to be in here and just increase our consistency. So I think going forward, I'm going to experiment with cutting this and trying out some of those changes. But nevertheless, guys, this should be a good little foundation for you to start experimenting with. I do think one of the big downsides to Volcarona GX, now that I've got some games in with it, is just getting down your basics turn 1 and getting set up in a format without Lele to search out things like Fan Club, Oak Setting, etc. And without something like Nest Ball to easily get those basics down to turn 1. So I think that is going to be the big challenge we're going to have to overcome with this deck. But if we can, I do expect it to still be pretty decent. So like I said, guys, that is going to be Volcarona GX. I hope you guys did enjoy this video. Definitely stay tuned to the channel. We have a ton of Cosmic Eclipse coverage coming up over the next several weeks as well. But if you did enjoy this content, feel free to like and subscribe and consider supporting this channel by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/rarecandytcg, or by picking up some merch from our online store, rarecandytcg.com. It would mean a lot. But as always, guys, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.